Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about an engine that is kind of cool. It's really historic. It's something that's out of our normal wheelhouse, but it's an engine that I've had a fair amount of experience with. I hope to have a little bit more experience coming up here in the next couple weeks. And I personally love the engine. A lot of people like it. A lot of people hate it. And we're going to explain why. That is the 4AGE Toyota engine. The 4AGE has been around for, well, over 3 decades now. It's been in a lot of different platforms going back to the early 80s. I believe it maintained production all the way into the 90s in the Euro and also Japanese market. Really fun engine for its time. Dual overhead cam, 16 valve, 1.6 liter, non-VTEC, no variable valve timing. Came in a 16 valve version and also a 20 valve version. Really popular for ITBs and things like that. They used it in the Formula Atlantic spec, which was like 230, 240 horsepower, naturally aspirated, revving out to like 9,500, 10,000, even upwards of 11,000 RPMs. Really crazy engine. Really well built. Yamaha, sorry, was very invested in the head design. They helped Toyota significantly with the development of it. Yamaha has their hands in all kinds of different engine development between Mazda, Toyota, Ford. You'd be surprised at how much and how many big engines that were really performance oriented that Yamaha had their hands in developing, but that's a separate video. But going back to the 4AGE, one of the reasons that I enjoy it is it's so iconic. I've had the pleasure of driving 3 cars with this engine in it. 2 of them were Corollas, both rear-wheel drive. The other one was an MR2. Now, what I will say, while this is a love-hate relationship with this engine, so many people watch things like Initial D. They see the Formula Atlantic engines making 230 horsepower. That is not the norm. Let's be honest. This engine did not produce that in very many applications. And to get the engine to produce those kind of power levels naturally aspirated, you pretty much have an all-out race engine that is meant to be ran at over 7,000 RPMs constantly. It's not meant to fall below that 7,000 RPM range. And that sort of engine would be absolutely terrible to drive on the street or in any street similar application. Let's just be honest. In stock form, it's not bad. They're reliable. They're simple to work on. They were one of the first belt-driven engines from Toyota, getting away from the old timing chain setups. It was really revolutionary in a lot of ways, and that's why I find it so enjoyable. There's just something about getting this very simple, very primitive now, but very sophisticated at the time, 1.6 liter and just banging the gears, you know, hearing that thing scream at 7,000, 7,500 RPMs in stock form is exhilarating. And in a lightweight car like a early MR2 or a Corolla AE86, anything like that is fun. If you put this engine in a 2,000 RPM car, or sorry, 2,000 pound car, and go out there and really run it, it's a blast. But you have to be a car guy to appreciate it. Because if you're not, you're gonna feel like you're driving a Corolla. And that's the downside to this engine. They don't make a lot of torque. They're in the low 100s for torque. They're only in like the 130, 140 horsepower range in stock form. Unless you get something like the 4AGZE, I believe is what it is, which is the supercharged variant that came in some of the MR2s and a couple other cars. Or if you have one that's really modified, that's been turbocharged or something like that, even then they're really limited by the stock fuel system. They're really limited by the high compression. They do have a really strong block. It's a cast iron block. And they can handle a couple pounds of boost pretty well and respond really well to it. But just to get to that next level and make any significant power is really a big cost and a big time investment. We're not going to get so much into the crazy offs like the 9AGE, which is like a freaking 3-4-way Frankenstein engine build, you're talking about a lot of work, a lot of machining, a lot of sourcing parts to make it work. I mean, that's a really expensive build. If you want to go and make upwards of 4-figure horsepower with one of these engines with a big turbo, that's the way to go. Go 9GE, have fun with it. I hope you've got a very big bank account to support it, because once again, that's not practical for most guys or most street applications. Going back to the basics, if you're going to modify one of these engines, have realistic expectations. Toyota and Yamaha did a really good job in developing this engine. From the factory exhaust manifolds, even the factory intake really isn't that bad. You can pick up maybe a couple horsepower by doing something like intake. Maybe if you get a decent header, you might pick up a couple horsepower on the higher end. You're not going to gain anything. You may even lose some on the mid and low range. If you're going to rebuild one, bumping up compression a little bit is always good. You know, more compression means more torque, more horsepower throughout the rev range. Small cams are definitely beneficial. Toyota did kind of err on the side of this needs to be a street car engine. So there is a little bit to be gained by doing cams and stuff like that, but you're not going to see these huge gains because the engine was so refined and so developed when it came off the showroom floor. Pretty much anything you have to do other than what we just listed, bumping the compression up, maybe slight headworks, mild cams, things of that nature, opening up the exhaust a little bit. Yeah, you might see some mild gains, but after that, anything you do, you're going to lose a lot of drivability. And that's really kind of what you get with this engine. It's pretty well built and developed right out of the box. You have a really good engine. However, if you're not happy with it out of the box, you're probably not going to be happy with it after you drop $3,000 or $4,000 into it just to gain 30-40 horsepower. And with that, you're only gaining maybe 15-20 foot-pounds of torque, which, as we know, torque is kind of really noticeable, especially for people that use vehicles on the street. That low and mid range is important, and whenever you start really trying to get above like the 165, 175 horsepower range on the 4AGE, you really start sacrificing that drivability factor. And don't get me wrong, like if you've got a really small car, you've got a first gen MR2, something like that, and you want to do a 4AG naturally aspirated build, hey, you got options like the 20 valve head, you've got turbo options. You can always, of course, if you already are running the 4AGZE, you've got the supercharger. You could throw a smaller pulley on there, make a couple more pounds of boost. By the way, this goes for the 4AGE and the 2ZZ. Superchargers are God's gift to both these engines. I had a Celica GTS with a 2ZZ in it. Had the old style gritty supercharger, only running like 6 pounds of boost. Guys, it made a heck of a difference in the drivability of that car. The low end torque on it really wasn't as bad as people would expect from a 2ZZ. I mean, it was fun. You drop that thing into third gear and rolling crank on it, it would run, and it made power, you know, from 3,500 RPMs all the way up into the 8.5 range. The 2ZZ is kind of the predecessor to the 4AGZ in a lot of ways, and the 4AGE and the 4AGZE, but that was a whole nother development department. We're not going to get into that in this video. But anyway, takeaway from this video: don't expect the 4AGE to go out there and be a 2JZE, because it's not. It will not. If you are a car guy, an enthusiast, you like history, you like the development of how these engines came about, and you could appreciate that this is a 1980s engine, this is a kind of a cool, really nostalgic vehicle or engine platform to work on, drive on. Almost anybody can work on them. They're very simple. Just once again, don't expect huge power out of them, because they're not, unless you're doing something like built internals with a lot of forced induction. I mean, even the Formula Atlantic engines, they were like 210 don't quote me on this. I think it was 230-ish, 240-ish horsepower. And once again, turning upwards of 10,000 RPMs. I've heard everything from 9,500 RPMs all the way up to 11,000. Either way, for any engine in that time period to make that is really impressive. But those are basically nearly one-off race engines. Everyone has so much research and development and time and energy and machining put into it. It's unreal, and they're meant to be rebuilt, you know, every track day pretty much. So anyway, guys, there's plenty of videos out there for the 4AGE. If you want to research them, you like the platform, check them out. This is just kind of my takeaway from it. I personally love them. I think they're great engines. I think Toyota did an amazing job with them. If you ever have a chance to drive one, do it. If you appreciate it and love it, you're probably just like me. If you hate it, that's okay. That's your preference. They are not torque monsters, and you have to drive them like a small engine. But with that being said, guys, I hope everybody is staying safe out there. Remember, be nice to your neighbors, be nice to your friends, and as always, all the way, guys, be safe.